What is up? Welcome back to the DFS Academy for Week 10. This is Club Fantasy's weekly DFS show. The NFL season is past the halfway point. Hopefully you are profitable, but if not, we have the entire second half of the season to get you there. That starts tonight. Let's build some lineups. Welcome to the DFS Academy for Week 10. I am your host, Ryan Weeks. With me, as always, Austin Amendolia. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Pretty good. We're recording late again, so we'll see how well I hold up over the next hour, but excited to be chatting with you again.
You did way better than me last week. Let's not call it what it is. What's funny is I'm always hypercritical of myself when it comes to intros, and I've noticed that 3 times tonight I've already said tonight. We release the show on a Friday morning, but we record it on Thursday night. So there's just a little behind the scenes action for you folks. If you've never tuned into an episode before, welcome. Guessing your fantasy season is over. Sorry to hear it, but we can at least help you win some money in DFS. We also like to remind everybody we don't just talk DFS. We actually play DFS. You can get into contests on both DraftKings and FanDuel with Austin, myself, a lot of other cool people from Club Fantasy, and people who have just watched the show over the years and started joining us. You will find links for that in the description of this video and any DFS articles you find at clubfantasyffl.com. But Austin, there's another way to get involved with DFS here at Club Fantasy. Tell them about the Discord, please.
Yeah, that is right. We have listener Discord. The link to join that is in the show description. You can come talk about any type of fantasy football you want with us. You can also talk some other sports with us, but importantly for this show, you can come talk to us about your DFS lineups throughout the rest of the weekend and leading up to game time. I will drop what my thoughts are on how things are evolving based on injury reports and whatnot. So you'll get my latest thinking on how I'm approaching the slate, and you can throw your lineups in there. We'll talk about, this is what I see based on what lineup you've built and how I see that you're trying to attack this slate. And then maybe you're like, yeah, it's exactly what I'm doing. Or maybe you're like, oh, well, actually, I don't believe that. So I'm going to change my lineup a little bit. And importantly, if you win, you can share your winnings with us, and we'll highlight it on the show, because that's the other fun part about this is we get to share our ups with each other.
And since we don't record this show live, if you guys want to interact with Austin and I live, the Discord is a great place to do it. Last Sunday, Austin and I just flat out share. Austin always does it. I tried to join the fun this week. We just shared our cash lineups last week, and Austin, it was a pretty damn good week for me in cash. We'll talk about that in just a few moments, but we always start with what we call answers to the test, and I like to start with last week's new millionaire. The winner of the DraftKings Millie Maker scored 264.7 points. That is the highest score this season. Wild ride. The lineup makes a ton of sense. I kind of hate, Austin, when these lineups just make sense, because it's like, man, I could have built that. Nothing will be worse than when we named like 8 of the 10 Millie Makers combined on our show like 3 weeks ago. And it's like, man, if we would have just tinkered with this a little bit, we could have made $1 million. But let's get into it. Caleb Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Jalen Warren, Jamar Chase, Drake London, Olamide Zaccheaus, Brock Bowers, Kyle Monangai, and the Tennessee Titans defense. Austin, right off the top, you notice this is a huge focus on the Chicago-Cincinnati game, which was clearly the right call. I was scared off of that game for 2 reasons, and those reasons were Joe Flacco and Caleb Williams. It was the shoulder injury. Caleb Williams was doing Caleb Williams things. He clearly balled out this week, as did Joe Flacco. Kyle Monangai popped. Olamide Zaccheaus ends up being a very cheap get different like stack with Caleb, and then you have Jamar Chase on the bring back. It seems like 9 times out of 10, calling the game that pops for that week, specifically when that game is 47-42, that's going to be the lineup that helps you cash.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and honestly, that's why, like, when we get to the tournament section of the show, I try and like pick a couple of games that I'm looking at attacking in that given week. And man, I wish I had gone in more heavily on the Chicago-Cincinnati game during that segment last week. I mean, we talked about Jamar Chase and we talked about DeAndre Swift, and so reference pivoting to Kyle Monangai, Swift pivoted. So I feel good about that. But I remember last week prepping for the show, I was like, I kind of like Caleb Williams this week. It's a really good matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals.
You just don't want me to yell at you again.
Well, because I talk about him all the time, and so it's like there's also this thing where it's like when we do this show, it's like I feel like I should talk about different players each week instead of consistently going back to the same guy. But if I had done it, I would have
They
looked
make
like a
sense.
freaking
They make
genius.
sense. Yeah, exactly. No other real correlation in this. As Austin mentioned, you heard the names: Christian McCaffrey, Jamar Chase, Kyle Monangai, and Brock Bowers. We specifically talked about Bowers being underpriced on DraftKings. Felt like we hit a home run there. But Austin, there was one thing that's not in the show sheet that I think struck me, and that I want people who are like me and just scratch that one lottery ticket every week to realize. This is not a perfect lineup. The thing that jumped out to me, Austin, is they paid more for Jamar Chase. This lineup scores another, 10 fantasy points if it's T. Higgins instead of Jamar Chase. I think Higgins had a better night and he's cheaper. And then maybe you pay up off of Zacchaeus, who only, and I say only loosely, or Warren, who only scored 17 points. There were points left on the board here. You don't need to be perfect to take this contest down. And again, I'm finding a flaw in a lineup that scored the most points in this tournament of any lineup we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, it does help when you have 4 players that each score 35 plus points. It helps bail you out a little bit on that. But yeah, to your point, like you can still get away with a quote unquote mistake here and there. I mean, Jalen Warren and Jamar Chase, I think they were very good. The process behind it was good, right? They were both in very good situations. The outcome just didn't work out, but it didn't matter for this lineup.
Nope. Well, yeah, like you said, 38. We'll wrap up on this. 38 from Caleb Williams, 37 from Christian McCaffrey, 41 in Drake London's 3-touchdown game, and 46 in Brock Bowers' 3-touchdown game. You're not beating that lineup, plain and simple, Austin. My cash lineup scored 194 on DraftKings, and that's my second week in a row hitting that number. And I'm like, man, this was like 194 took down the Millie Maker once this season. I never go and look and see what the winner did until we're prepping for the show. And I'm like, oh, he beat me by 70 points. So I stood no chance because, again, I didn't hit on quarterback. But Austin, we don't just play the Millie Maker. We also play cash. It's about building bankroll. And you had a pretty damn good week.
Yeah, I had another good week. We've definitely gotten back on track for the season after, weeks 2 and 3 are a little bit rough for me. I was 67% in head-to-heads this past week, which brings me up to 47% on the season. We're getting closer and closer back to that 50% mark. A few things I wanted to highlight. First off, the thing that I was most excited to see this week is we finally got the free square this season in cash in the $25 double up on DraftKings. Kyle Monangai was a whopping 91%. So he was great. He crushed it. But the good thing is, even if he didn't, it didn't matter. It was just like once you turned over the cards, it was all good to go. I did mention it in passing on the show, but by the time we got to start Sit Different Day, which I was part of this past Saturday, we knew it was Monangai, and I was like big on him, and Josh was giving me a hard time, but I'm glad I stuck with it. The other things that really helped out in cash this past week was I did land on Jackson Dart at quarterback. He was 67% rostered in that $25 double up. And then lastly, one thing I noticed, I didn't play Parker Washington, but he was a really good play this past week. He was 38% rostered. He was the easy savings option. He was more highly rostered last week than Shamari DK, who we talked about on this show. And I think it just goes to show, like, sometimes you do need to pivot on to like better cheap end players when they pop up. I so happen to just play Demario Douglas because I am a sicko Falcons fan who knows that they cannot defend the slot. And so I was like, Pop Douglas, you're going to be in my cash lineup this week. And it worked out because if I hadn't have had him and I had gone with DK over Washington, I think I would have been in some trouble. But I ended up cashing in that contest as well.
It was bittersweet for me in cash on DraftKings. I always play on DraftKings. For folks who are not aware of how I play DFS, I scratch my one lottery ticket for the Millie Maker, and then I try to play enough head-to-heads to win that $20 that I just gave away back. I won every head-to-head on DraftKings. I hit in one double up. I didn't hit in the other double up. All in all, I came out like even. I loved my cash lineup because I have a head-to-head I play with a friend every week. I loved my cash lineup so much on FanDuel, Austin. I threw it in like $10 a contest over there, lost every single one of them. It was a terrible week. I somehow took down my friend, so I made half my money back just on him alone. but it was a ugly lineup, especially when we talk about some of the scores we saw in our FanDuel contest last week. My goodness, it was not a pretty lineup for me on FanDuel. But again, bittersweet week. I learned a lot. It was fun, and I think that's what matters. So
yeah, there you go.
All right, as we pivot off of week 9, head into week 10, we start the show off with cash, as we always do. This is Austin's specialty. This is where you're building your bankroll. We kick the show off. We go in salary tiers. We call it top of the class. These are the high-priced players, $8,000 or more. Austin, you've never, and I understand we've kind of adapted the show a little bit this season. You've never given me 3 players here before.
Yeah, usually I'm not that excited about 3 different players at this price point, but I think there are a lot of different ways you can go this week. So I have 2 receivers and a running back for the spot. The reason for that is I'm more likely to pay up at receiver this week because of the nature of the salary on the salary context on this slate. And the 2 guys that really stick out to me are Jackson Smith-Njigba and Amon-Ra St. Brown. JSN is at $8,600 on DraftKings, $9,500 on FanDuel. St. Brown is a little bit cheaper on both sites, actually $200 cheaper on both sites. He's $8,400 on DraftKings, $9,300 on FanDuel. I think there are potential pathways to play both of these guys, but you could also play either. They both just are continuing to get really good volume. Amon-Ra St. Brown, like I feel like he's kind of quietly had a really good fantasy season in terms of like he's been consistently getting in that 15 to 20 point range. He's been benefiting from the PPR volume, but he hasn't scored a ton of touchdowns. And so I feel like he's gotten overlooked and people don't feel like he's having a good season, but the volume is there that I really like him. And the other reason I wanted to highlight these 2 receivers is because Puka Nacua is on the slate.
Yeah.
And based on the season, like if Nacua is available, you almost always want to play him. The concern I have is what happened last week, which was he was doing well in the game. He still hit in cash. He played long enough in the game to get you enough points that it didn't sink your cash lineup, but he did exit early. And so I can't predict when that might happen. He takes a hit that just, messes with something that he's already dealing with, or he comes up funny on a run in the first quarter and he sinks my lineup that way. That makes me nervous. So I would rather look at the next 2 highest salaried receivers in JSN and St. Brown for that very reason. But I'm not going to be mad if somebody plays Puka Nacua just because he gets ridiculous volume when he's playing.
I have nothing to add, so I'm going to let you talk about your running back. I have an issue with all 3 of these guys that we'll talk about at the end. Just my math brain is hurting right now. We'll talk about that in a second. So go ahead and talk about your 3rd guy, and then we'll jump in. So
that is. I'm very interested in that. So yeah. I think there are some cheaper running back options this week. So I don't think you have to go this route, but I do think Jahmyr Gibbs is a really good player to look at as well. At $8K on DraftKings and $8,800 on FanDuel. The concern I do have with Jahmyr Gibbs, he's been particularly boomer bust this year. So I kind of like him more in tournament settings, but I think the matchup is good enough that you can get away with it in cash settings as well. The Washington Commanders have allowed an average of 25 points to the running back position per game since week 6. So for that reason, I feel like they're one of the more leaky teams against the running game right now. And Jahmyr Gibbs is bound for a bounce back. He rarely has 2 down weeks in a row, so I feel really good about his chances to bounce back. But as I mentioned, I probably will be saving at running back, and I have a guy that's a little bit cheaper than Jahmyr Gibbs that we can talk about here in a moment.
Austin, it's been a while since we've really talked about the price discrepancies between the 2 websites, and I'm noticing when I'm looking at your high-priced players, and these aren't just your high. Let me be clear: this is my issue with the sites, not with Austin. The price discrepancies aren't where I want them to be. You get 20% more salary on FanDuel than you do on DraftKings. So the expectation is that a player would be 20% more expensive on FanDuel than DraftKings. These players are already expensive on FanDuel, with the exception of maybe Jahmyr Gibbs. Not one of them is even 10% cheaper on DraftKings, let alone the 20% they should be. To me, this is going to sound ridiculous. It almost feels like JSN and Amon-Ra St. Brown are almost unplayable. And what I mean by that is, I just quickly was doing the math while you were talking. On FanDuel, JSN is $95,000, $9,500. That would equate to roughly 15.8% of your salary. on DraftKings, where he only goes down by $900, not a full 10%. He is 17.6, I think, percent of your salary, 2% more of your salary. I just don't like how these are lining up with these high priced players. And then Austin, my brain just starts getting into the thing that it's doing, and I'm scrolling, and it seems like almost nobody is getting the 20% discount they should be getting on DraftKings. Like, DraftKings just feels like they may be overpricing players right now. I don't know if it's an overcorrection because DraftKings has been the one that we have felt have been under on a lot of players. I'm worried about the high price players is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, and I think it's totally fair. I do think DraftKings is trying to make it harder for you to build a lineup. That is good.
Yeah.
I think they have. I personally feel like FanDuel is more on top of the game when it comes to reacting to player trends that we see. They are very quick to say, "Oh, this player's getting the volume. We need to boost their salary up so that you can't just have free, easy picks every week." DraftKings is like, you can go 4 or 5 weeks, and a guy like Chris Olave is still not getting priced up to the point that he needs to be. But the other thing that I think is playing a role here is quarterbacks are much more expensive on FanDuel in general and overall than they are on DraftKings. And so, like a guy that we'll talk about later, Jacoby Brissett, he's $4,600 on DraftKings. He is $6,900 on FanDuel.
So that's where they're making. Okay, that explains quite a bit, actually. So
yeah, and I think that's largely because FanDuel is a half PPR website, and so the quarterback position is then comprising so much more of a portion of your overall fantasy output because of the nature of the running backs and receivers not getting that full point for the reception.
Hey, I learned something there because like it was bothering me, and like as I'm looking at some of these players, the 20% starts to play up, but it's still not happening as often as it should. It seems like quarterback and tight end are the ones where FanDuel's like, okay, but I've just to this point in the season, none of this has caught my eye until I was looking at these 3 players, and I was like, not one of these guys got a full 10% discount. And that is just wild to me because like in theory, they should be closer to 20 and they weren't. All right. That's my soapbox for the high price players this week. I don't know how many of them I'll be building with. I'll see how I feel when Sunday morning rolls around. We move on to what we call the band nerds. These are the good students, spend a little bit too much time on those instruments, not ready for top of the class. These are your mid-tier players, $6,000 to $8,000. Obviously, Austin, if you're leaning heavy on the top of the class, there's going to be fewer players in this category.
Yeah, exactly. So there are 2 players in this area that I think are very intriguing. First off, the running back that I am more intrigued in than Jahmyr Gibbs this week, it is Devon Achane. He is $7,400 on DraftKings, $8,500 on FanDuel. It is in part the matchup, but it's also just the usage. Like the way that Achane is used, he's essentially like a receiver. He still continues to get a ton of pass catching volume. So particularly on DraftKings, I'm inclined to play him. But also, he's going up against the Buffalo Bills, who, while they have been they have been a tough matchup in general, they've been pretty leaky to running backs overall. And Devon Achane did just fine when these 2 teams played each other earlier in the season. And because Achane gets his work done through the air primarily and not on the ground, I'm not worried about him getting game scripted out. Like he's going to continue to be on the field, even though Miami are 9.5 point underdogs in the situation. And Buffalo's allowed the 4th most points to running backs since week 6. So it's a really plus matchup from that perspective.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is this, and we've talked about it before, Achane is probably the best wide receiver in Miami. They're not going to stop throwing to him. It's calmed down a lot this season. He was at one point averaging like 8 targets a game last year. It's not been quite that, but the fact of the matter is also he's one of those players that any single time he touches the ball, he can take it the length of the field. And I think that's important. So
yeah, exactly. Also in this price range, I have Trey McBride, who is $6K on DraftKings, $7K on FanDuel. He is just, we know that Kyler Murray is out. He was placed on the IR. So it's Jacoby Brissett under center again. And we saw that with Jacoby Brissett under center, Brissett knows how to get the ball to his volume hogs. We saw an uptick in volume for Marvin Harrison Jr., but we also saw it for Trey McBride. And we've also seen Trey McBride scoring touchdowns with Brissett under center. So I think he's a really strong play. What I will say is it is going to be nearly impossible for you to play two of those 8K plus players and Trey McBride.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that you're going to have to decide this week in your lineup is whether you are paying up for McBride and then saving at receiver or running back, or if you're going to punt at running back, which I do think there's an interesting punt option that we'll get to in a little bit.
I saw an interesting tweet, and I should have noted who it was from. I want to say Jordan Schultz, but I'm probably wrong. In his first, I think, 21 games with Kyler Murray, Trey McBride has 3 touchdowns. In the last 4 games or 3 games with Jacoby Brissett, Trey McBride has 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Like, Kyler Murray is a detriment to Trey McBride. You rejoice when you see Jacoby Brissett as a starter if you are a Trey McBride manager.
Yeah, it's wild.
As we move into bookworms, I think the very first pick here makes a ton of sense. This is where you're building the bulk of your roster. Certainly, if you're spending a lot of money on the up top guys, value price players, $4,000 to $6,000, easily underestimated. They're going to be the ones that are going to build your lineup. And your first quarterback, Austin, is Jacoby Brissett.
Yes, Jacoby Brissett. I already mentioned him once on the show. He's $4,600 on DraftKings, $6,900 on FanDuel. Here is the thing about Jacoby Brissett. It's really the thing about this matchup. So Arizona is playing Seattle this week. There are a lot of players that I am interested in from this matchup. There are a lot of cash viable players from this matchup. I've already mentioned JSN. I've mentioned Trey McBride, and I am now mentioning Jacoby Brissett. I also think Marvin Harrison is a little bit intriguing as a cash play here. I also think that the Seattle, AJ Barner, the Seattle tight end, is an interesting play here given the salary. I am not playing that many players from the Seattle-Arizona game.
This is not the Chicago-Cincinnati game.
It could be, but it's not
the
way. But it's a gamble, and it's not the way that I'm going to play my cash lineup. Once I get to once I get to 3 players from the same matchup, I'm like, okay, that's plenty.
Yeah.
So I think there are going to be some decision points on that front. But for Jacoby Brissett, I'm very surprised that he's at $4,600 on DraftKings. Honestly, I feel like they were hedging that Kyler Murray was going to come back, and they hedged wrong. Like, I feel like if I was managing DraftKings, which, you know, I am poachable. You can make it happen. I'll
write a letter of recommendation.
I would have priced up Jacoby Brissett just in case, because we've seen him playing over and over, and he has hit 20 plus points every single time that he has played. Like, if he does that at the salary, it's going to pay off so severely. And, you know, Seattle, they have a tough defense. They've been one of the better defenses this year. They've are not a great matchup. They've allowed just under 18 points per game to quarterbacks over the past 4 weeks. But like 18 points for a guy that's priced at 4.6K is totally fine with me.
So there's an interesting parallel between the Seattle defense and the Baltimore defense. When Baltimore was having issues with their linebackers, they had to move Kyle Williams up from safety and play more in the box. And we all know how bad they were getting decimated on defense. They were one of the worst defenses in the league, one of the best for fantasy football. They get their linebackers back, Roquan Smith and somebody else who I can't think of right now. And Williams goes back to safety. And all of a sudden, they're a much better defense over the last 2 weeks. Seattle just lost Ernest Jones, their best linebacker by far, and they're going to have to do something similar. I think we see the Seattle defense, who, as Austin mentioned, already wasn't great. I think we see a step back for Seattle. I would do anything to have this game in Arizona instead of Seattle because that home field advantage is ridiculous, but I love Jacoby Brissett this week. Austin, I'm sure you're tired of hearing this on this show, and maybe the fans are as well. He's my stream of the week this week. So there's always a parallel there.
Nice. No, there you go.
Yeah.
Next up at quarterback, though, I also have Jackson Dart here in my cash pool. He was great last week for cash, and I think he will be again this week. He's $5,700 on DraftKings, $7,700 on FanDuel. That might be a little bit too pricey for my blood on FanDuel, but here's the thing. He's playing the Chicago Bears. We just saw what the Chicago Bears allowed Joe Flacco to do. The only reason we're not talking about the Chicago Bears defense breaking down last week is because of the breakdown in the Cincinnati Bengals defense last week, right? Like,
yeah,
Jackson Dart is in a really smash spot here. I think he's also a GPP consideration for me this week. I'm not going to talk about him in the tournament section, but I think he is definitely tournament viable because this game, it could be just as back and forth as the Cincinnati and Chicago game was last week.
That's literally nothing to add. When you're looking for the quarterback for your GPP lineup, you are looking for 30 plus points on the table. Anybody playing the Bears defense right now has 30 plus points on the table.
Exactly. At running back in this price range, I'm looking at Ramondre Stevenson, who's $5,400 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. He's got a decent matchup. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have allowed the third most points to the running back position since week 6. He may sit, and if he does sit, I'm kind of intrigued by either backup running back. They both got a decent amount of volume, but I'm really sticking with Travion Henderson because it leaned towards him. The reason that the guy that I can't even remember his name right now seemed to pop last week is because he scored a touchdown. And we've seen this before. Like, touchdowns aren't reliable. You can't predict them from week to week. So I would still stick with Henderson if we have to pivot off of Stevenson.
You say touchdowns aren't predictable, and you're absolutely right. But the running joke in fantasy right now, and we got hit with this on a few of our other shows this week, is it's anybody but Travion Henderson for the New England Patriots for some reason, because they're bringing people in off the streets. Terrell Jennings was the name you were looking for, who now has the same amount of rushing touchdowns as Travion Henderson in 18 carries. So I hope at some point they just cut this kid loose. But I want to go back to where this whole conversation started. If Ramondre is healthy, he's going to score a touchdown this week.
Yeah, no, I very much believe that. Absolutely. A couple of receivers in this price range, because we do need to save us our money somewhere if we're going to be paying up for guys like Jason and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Darius Slayton at $4,300 on DraftKings, $5,800 on FanDuel is another great option. Again, I already mentioned that New York Giants, Chicago Bears game. The Bears have been giving up a lot of points to receivers, C.T. Higgins last week, and Darius Slayton has been getting a decent amount of volume. I think Wan'Dale Robinson is also a really good play. The reason I'm talking about Slayton and not Robinson is because of the price range and because I need to save more money because I'm looking at paying up for some of those other elite receivers. So Slayton is making my lineup that way.
Yeah, now that he's the one, they've priced Wan'Dale up a bit. So
they have priced Wan'Dale up a little bit, especially because he's just been getting plenty of volume to go around. But then my other receiver I have here is none other than Parker Washington, who was someone that we talked about already in this show. He was important for you to hit the cash line last week. He's $4,700 on DraftKings, so he got priced up a little bit, $5,600 on FanDuel. The thing to flag here is, technically speaking, Jacoby Myers is going to be playing for the Jacksonville Jaguars on Sunday. And he plays a very similar role as Parker Washington. Like, he's kind of a Parker Washington replacement. The question I have is, with this trade happening as late as it did, will he be ready to like carry the volume as much? Maybe so. So it might be a little bit risky from that perspective. But Jacoby Myers is priced very similarly to Parker Washington. So if you wanted to just say, I'm picking the slot receiver for the Jaguars, you could pick either one. I feel comfortable sticking with Washington, though.
It sounds like you already looked. So Myers is on the main slate, because when I was building my showdown slate tonight, they had his name, but they had it in bright red, like, don't pick him, because obviously they created this slate before this trade had happened. So.
Yeah, they did that. So I guess they can't remove players from a slate, but they can add them. And so yes, he is on the main slate. He is priced right above Parker Washington at $4,800. So
interesting.
I think that's DraftKings just throwing up their hands and saying, like, I don't know.
So I'm 100% with you specifically to this week. We got a ton of questions. Hilariously, on our waiver show on Tuesday, my top 2 waiver claims were Parker Washington and Torrey Horton. And they both were replaced within minutes of the show ending because Jacoby Myers and Rashid Shaheed go there and steal jobs. I think the world is going to stay away from Parker Washington. And for week 1, and specifically, I guess, week 10, I don't think that's the right move. I don't think Jacoby Myers just comes here and takes over. Washington has earned Trevor Lawrence's trust over 3 seasons, I believe, at this point. It's a role he's been playing. And then the other part is, you're absolutely right. Jacoby Myers is eventually the replacement. I'm not going to get into how I think this is a weird trade to begin with, because Parker Washington was only playing because of Travis Hunter being hurt. So where does Jacoby Myers fit when Travis Hunter's back? That's a problem for somebody else on another show. I wanted to just throw in Brian Thomas Jr. might miss this game as well. I think he's actually going to. So Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington feasibly against Houston, where they should be throwing the ball a lot, could both do what they're supposed to do in this game. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm totally with that.
All right, let's move on to my favorite category, the punt plays of the week. The sub $4,000 players. C's get degrees, and you can't build a lineup without a tight end in the defense. Now, Austin, you gave us an expensive tight end, but you got to throw a cheap one in there too in case they want to build expensive elsewhere.
Yeah, so I am looking at Mason Taylor this week, who I know plays for the New York Jets, and like
red flag number one.
That's a little bit scary. I totally understand it, but he's $3,200 on DraftKings. He's $5K on FanDuel. He doesn't need to do much. If he falls into the end zone, we're totally fine. He has had several games where he gets really good volume. He's got a 12 target performance and an 8 target performance on the season. Of course, last week, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, it was back and forth with the Jets and the Bengals. And so that was part of the reason that he was so heavily utilized. The matchup is decent this week. Now he goes up against the Cleveland Browns, who they've averaged over 15 points per game since week 6 to the tight end position. So it's a decent matchup. It's not a great one, but there's not a lot of really great saving options at tight end this week. Dalton Schultz is a little bit cheap, and I think he's a worthy matchup, but I'm looking at Mason Taylor as one of my ways to save salary this week.
I think it makes sense. When you look at that Browns team, they're not a team made to stop the tight end, and they haven't been for a long time. They do a lot of other stuff very well. They certainly get after the quarterback, but I think that also plays to Mason Taylor in this. This is a team, Austin, that has no intermediate wide receivers. They have, I mean, Garrett Wilson does everything, but you can cover Garrett Wilson when he's the only one you have to worry about. Mason Taylor is the underneath option. And when Myles Garrett is bearing down on you, you're going to be looking for your underneath option quite a lot.
Yeah, no, exactly. I also have my defense here. I'm going with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are pretty cheap, $2,600 on DraftKings, $4,200 on FanDuel. Here's the thing. They're going up against the Houston Texans, who have a bad offensive line, and now have their number one quarterback, Davis Mills, under center. Just kidding. CJ Stroud is number one. But Davis Mills is the one starting this week, and seems like a good matchup for Jacksonville.
I was looking, what was I looking at? I was trying to decide how I wanted to rank Davis Mills, if he deserved any consideration for DFS this week. And I saw he scored like 6 points last week. And I was like, oh, did he come in later than no, he threw like 30 passes and still scored 6 fantasy points. This guy is, first of all, do not punt to Davis Mills because he's cheap. Second of all, the Jacksonville defense, still a good play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I tuned into that game late and I was like, why is it only why is it like 15-9 right now? And then I realized, oh, CJ Stroud is not playing and hasn't been playing for a minute.
Yeah. Davis Mills. What's funny is when he was a rookie, I thought that kid could have done something, but
oh yeah, we all picked him up on our waiver wire in dynasty leagues. Like, can't lie.
Was not to be. All right, folks, that wraps up the cash section. We still cover GPP, but I'd like to remind you before we move on, you can play DFS with both Austin, myself, and some other really cool people. You will find links in the description of this video for a $2 contest on DraftKings and a $2 contest on FanDuel. We actually on DraftKings run the Thursday showdown slate as well as the Sunday main slate. So make sure you jump in there, come play with us, hopefully make a little bit of money. We announce the winners at the end of the show, so you'll be hearing about that in just a moment. As we move on to GPP, we break this one down by position. Austin gives some picks. I give a slightly worse pick at every position, and we see how that goes. Austin, I saw you working while we're working. Austin is adding names to his show sheet. So, Austin, you have not one, not two, but 3 quarterbacks for us that people should be considering on their GPP lineups.
Yeah, well, because when I was working on this last night, I had 3 people in mind. And I was like, okay, I got to leave somebody for Ryan to put into the show sheet. So
and then you saw I didn't take him, so it worked out.
So I just started adding more names. But first off, we're going to talk about Matthew Stafford. So I'm really intrigued by the San Francisco LA Rams matchup this week. It's one of the higher totals on the slate. It's at 49.5. I do think it's going to get slightly overlooked behind the Buffalo Miami matchup and the Detroit Washington matchup. I think people will be more drawn to those two games. And so it's probably an easy way to start to get leverage. But also, like, we've seen these two teams have those back and forth games, and it's low key a really good matchup for kind of both of the quarterbacks. For Matthew Stafford, though, the 49ers have allowed the sixth most points to the quarterback position since week 6. And the thing that's been wild about Stafford lately, he has been throwing a ton of touchdowns. Maybe this is a bad time to bet on it since he's coming off of 2 games where he's had like 4 and 5 touchdown games. But it's interesting because in past years, I remember thinking about Matthew Stafford and being like, he never scores more than 2 touchdowns in a game. Well, he's doing it this year, and I think this is a really fantastic game environment. So I'm intrigued by that. I also just want to shout out 2 other game environments. That's just why I threw these 2 quarterbacks in here. And I think we'll touch on them in different ways. But I do think it's worth going back to Caleb Williams this week.
Certainly.
That we already talked about the Chicago New York Giants matchup. Like, I'm really intrigued by the back and forth potential there. And so Caleb Williams at $6K on DraftKings, $7,400 on FanDuel is really good. And also keep in mind, like, you don't have to play all of these guys on every website. So, like, I didn't have a Caleb Williams lineup on DraftKings last week, which is a little bit sad. But I did have a Caleb Williams lineup on Underdog Fantasy because I do the snake drafts on there.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't have played a contest where only the top 5 win, I would have cashed because going into the 4 o'clock games, I was in the top 5 in that matchup and was really sad because Roma Dunze goose egged. So that's all to say, like, play them in different spots. And then the other game environment is, again, to highlight the Arizona-Seattle matchup because I think that is a game that is right for big scores. It is also a much lower over under than the other games on the slate. It's at 44.5. So I think that one definitely gets overlooked, but I think it has a decent amount of potential to hit the over. And I prefer to stack with Sam Darnold a little bit on that because I think Sam Darnold, like, we just saw him like throw for like 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So we can see him. We've seen he has the ceiling potential there. I don't think Brissett's going to have that like 30-point ceiling potential, but Sam Darnold might.
Yeah, Brissett feels like the safe option for cash, and Darnold 4 touchdowns in 1/2 last week feels like the big play option. I'm going with a player who we've seen hit big plays. Same player I went with last week, and it didn't quite work out, but the matchup is the matchup. I'm going with Jared Goff, 5,900 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. Yes, it's back-to-back weeks. Yes, Goff is hit or miss, and yes, the game is outdoors, which is probably a knock on Jared Goff, but it's Washington. They've been so bad. We tend to avoid giving full season stats at this point, but it's been the whole season. Washington has been getting beat up on by quarterbacks outside of week 1. I think my stat was they are the 4th worst team against the quarterback since week 2 because they somehow slowed down Russell Wilson in week 1. I guess I don't know why I said somehow there. But you had Sam Darnold hit them for 4 touchdowns in the first half last week. Patrick Mahomes dropped 3 on them. Dak Prescott dropped 3 on them. That's their last 3 games, folks. Like, this is a team that is just getting killed by quarterbacks, by wide receivers, by tight ends, everybody. I like Jared Goff in this one. I'm just hoping he doesn't turn into outdoors Jared Goff. I need him to give me one good game to make me not look like an idiot.
Yeah, there you go. Well, he could turn into shrivel up in the outdoors, but I like going with Jared Goff in this matchup too. I mean, like you said, Washington's been a really good matchup for opposing offenses and quarterbacks.
Yep. Moving on to the running backs, Austin, you got another 3 for us here. Obviously, with the final guy on this list, there's a bit of a caveat.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is, like, if you watched the show last week, it's kind of the same guys. Just about.
Oh, it really is. I didn't even. Kenneth Walker's new, I think.
We got one new guy.
Yeah,
but Christian McCaffrey, we're going back there. $9K on DraftKings, $9,700 on FanDuel. Look, I don't care how good the matchup or how bad the matchup seems. If you go and log into DraftKings, it's going to have a red number 1 next to Christian McCaffrey because the LA Rams have given up the least amount of points to running backs so far throughout the season. And I don't care because it's Christian McCaffrey. And I think that he's going to have the ability to still get there. They're going to utilize him super heavily. And between him being priced up and the red number one, people are not going to want to play him. He just won somebody $1 million. I'm like always interested in finding a way to get him into my lineup. It is hard. It is hard if you're going to try and play Matthew Stafford, Christian McCaffrey, and bring it back with either Devontae Adams or Puka Nacua. So I will say, like, I understand the challenge there, but I think it's worth figuring out a way and a strategy to get McCaffrey in your lineup. Maybe you do it by playing a Sam Darnold as your quarterback because it's giving you a little bit of salary relief there.
Yeah, I mean, what can I add? You want Christian McCaffrey in your lineup as many times as you can make it happen.
Exactly. Now, this is the one that comes with a caveat. Of course, if DeAndre Swift does not play on Sunday, then don't play him. But I do feel good about the chances that DeAndre Swift does play on Sunday because he returned to practice on Wednesday. So that's a good step forward in his recovery.
I think when I was looking at my rankings today, I don't even think he has a tag. I think right now they don't even have a tag on him. So I'm feeling pretty good about Swift playing.
There you go. So he's at $6,100 on DraftKings, $7,100 on FanDuel. It's a really good matchup for the Giants. Basically, like if I'm not playing, well, even if I am playing a Caleb Williams lineup, I might put in a DeAndre Swift lineup as well. Like we saw, like Williams and Monangai get there last week. There's no reason Williams and Swift can't also get there this week. But it's a really great matchup for Swift. So I feel like even if you're not playing the Caleb Williams side, you should have some lineups that have Swift involved.
Plus, I feel like so many people are going to plug Monangai in thinking that it's just his backfield now, and I just don't see that happening.
I don't see that happening either. I very much agree with you. I think that Swift is going to get to take that role back.
There you go. Give us a little bit on Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, so this is like I want to play one of the running backs for Seattle.
Just to get into that game.
To get into that game, and I do think the running backs are an interesting way to go at it because I think people are going to be like, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Torrey Horton, AJ Barner, like the pass catchers are it right now. We just saw the passing game light itself on fire last week, but like these are still two really like respectable running backs. And we haven't seen Kenneth Walker in particular have one of those multi-touchdown games that we know he is capable of. Going up against the Arizona Cardinals, I think it's a really great position for him to bounce back. And at $5,300, if I can get him into my lineup and he gets 2 touchdowns, it's really going to help me out elsewhere in my lineup because I'm saving there.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I've been defending Kenneth Walker this whole season. I need this guy to pop off just to make me look good for 1 week. For my running back, I'm going off a guy coming off of a bye, and I think there may be a little bit of an injury scare, and it's a unfounded injury scare. I'm going with Quinshon Judkins taking on the Jets. All reports are that his shoulder is fine. All reports were that he was fine just about immediately after the game. But I think people are panicked because they remember he got hurt. There was a whole bunch of folks who went out and bought Dylan Sampson, even though the Browns were on bye last week. They did that on their waiver wire. I think people are worried about Quinshon Judkins. You certainly don't need to be worried about the Jets. They have traded away all their best defensive players, specifically Quinnen Williams, who was plugging up the middle of that line. And if you don't follow the Jets, you may not know that inexplicably, they've also benched their best linebacker, Quincy Williams, saying that he's been underperforming, though he's been on IR for 4 of the last 5 weeks. So figure that one out. But what it really means is the middle of the field may literally be wide open for Quinshon Judkins. This is a person who we saw just a couple of games ago drop a 3-touchdown game. The Cleveland Browns offense runs over and through Quinshon Judkins. This feels like the kind of game where it's going to be Justin Fields and Breece Hall running on one side and Quinshon Judkins running on the other side. I'm really excited about what this kid can do. And the salary, as Austin mentioned, sometimes DraftKings just lets things slide. $6,500 for Judkins with that touchdown upside is perfect on DraftKings.
Yeah, he was someone I considered for the cash portion of the show. So I think it's definitely worth a play this week.
Yep. Moving on to the wide receivers, Austin. Let's talk about these guys. You brought them up quite a bit when you were talking about the other game. Devontae Adams, man, is something else playing with Matthew Stafford, reminding everybody quite how good he is.
Yeah, he really is. And also, this is a little bit of feeling nervous about the Puka Nacua injury potential and him exiting the game early. But even if Puka Nacua plays all 4 quarters, I feel like Devonta Smith is a really good pivot off of Nacua. He is priced up. He is almost as expensive as Puka Nacua. He is $7,700 on DraftKings, $8,800 on FanDuel, but it's really getting that Matthew Stafford stack. There's not a lot of other receivers I'm really interested in stacking with Matthew Stafford. I think you probably stack Stafford with either Nakua or Devontae Adams, bring back someone on the other side with the 49ers and get out of it. Maybe you throw in Tyler Higbee as a stack as well. I don't mind that. I think Tyler Higbee is still being utilized enough to warrant that, but it's to say I want that stack, and I like Adams as my favorite receiver to stack with Stafford. I alluded to this earlier. I'm really interested in Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. $5,300 on DraftKings, $6,600 on FanDuel. That just feels too cheap for how he's being used with Jacoby Brissett under center. And I think that the Arizona Cardinals are going to have to pass the ball to be able to keep up in this matchup. I do think the Seattle Seahawks offense is enough that like they're going to be passing the ball, and Brissett knows how to pepper his primary pass catchers with targets. So I feel really good about the potential for Harrison to pop. He was pretty decent last week, and we could see he did that without even hitting 100 yards in that game, because I remember I had him in my captain spot in a showdown slate, and I was like, come on, get those extra 4.5 points.
I need that
and
bonus, baby.
Never got there, but I did still hit the cash line with him in that captain spot. So excited about him and Jacoby Brissett for another week.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is Jacoby Brissett has done the right things with this offense, and I'll be real interested to see if they actually get Trey Benson back this week, just kind of what that offense looks like. Hilariously, if I was going to say with a functional quarterback, it's a shame we can't talk about Kyler Murray that way.
Yeah, the offseason discourse is going to be so fascinating about Kyler Murray.
The most hilarious thing is this all goes down the week the new Call of Duty game comes out. The jokes just write themselves. It is literally serendipitous, or whatever the negative connotation of serendipitous is. That's what's going on with Kyler Murray right now. You had mentioned Darius Slayton earlier in the show, though.
I did, and again, it's the Chicago New York Giants game. Like, I am looking at that matchup. Darius Slayton. Again, this is another salary thing, right? I've already named some really expensive guys between Devontae Adams, Christian McCaffrey, Matthew Stafford's pretty priced up, and so I'm looking at Darius Slayton. But I think you can go with pretty much any New York Giants pass catcher in this context. If you're looking to stack this game, I don't mind Wan'Dale Robinson. I don't mind Theo Johnson. I probably wouldn't go with Daniel Bellinger. It feels a little bit too nasty for me, but Slayton is a really solid guy to me. He's been getting the volume, and we've seen the big play potential. And speaking of big play potential, I'm getting the stack with your quarterback, because Jameson Williams, to me, I was very intrigued in how he was utilized coming out of the bye week last week. He was getting higher volume. He was getting those explosive plays. I'm pretty sure he got in the end zone. And yet DraftKings said, yeah, okay, cool. This guy that could probably pop 20, 30 on the slate, we'll put him at $4,900. Whatever, no big deal. Yeah. I just am like, that price range feels so off to me. And so honestly, I don't care if I have any other Detroit Lions or Washington Commanders player in my lineup. I'm totally comfortable just sticking Jameson Williams in my lineup, regardless of the stacking or correlation.
Jameson Williams is a guy who is built for GPP. You wonder when that week's going to happen. He got a big touchdown last week, and it was a really nice athletic touchdown. You just would have liked to have seen more, and yeah, that's kind of what you're missing right now. I'm also going to stack with my quarterback in cash. I'm probably just going to take the coward's route and go Amon-Ra St. Brown, because why wouldn't I? I'm going to stack him elsewhere. Spoiler alert. For GPP. So my favorite wide receiver, and this is almost a ode to FanDuel, is Emeka Egbuka. I feel like DraftKings has priced Emeka Egbuka properly at $7,000. He only goes up $800 on FanDuel. If you need a reminder, Austin's favorite wide receivers this week both cost above $8,500, and Emeka Egbuka is only $7,800 on FanDuel. I understand there's a gamble here, believe me. But the fact of the matter is this: they're coming off of a bye. I believe Emeka Egbuka is going to be completely healthy now. Chris Godwin is not playing this week. Got announced while I was at my son's band concert today. I don't think we're going to see Bucky Irving this week. Emeka Egbuka is the weapon for Baker Mayfield against a defense that just gave up 3 touchdowns to Drake London. And there are rumors that Christian Gonzalez is not going to play this game as well. So they're going to be possibly down their best corner, going up against a wide receiver who has shown a lot of upside. Love Emeka Egbuka. Adore him on FanDuel. Like him a lot on DraftKings.
Yeah, and honestly, when you say that, I'm like, Drake May, Baker Mayfield playing each other. That feels like a matchup that's right for some fun back and forth.
100%. Yeah, that if I had to put a lot of money on a game being the Cincinnati Chicago game, which is a ridiculous statement, I think I would go Tampa Bay New England just because Drake May has looked unstoppable this year.
Yeah, no, it's true.
All right, Austin, we got tight ends here, and you have a guy who has one of the best matchups. Came off the injury report today, so I had mentioned during my stream of the week section that I was a little nervous about him. Feel a lot less nervous now. I think he's a good play.
Yeah, I feel less nervous about him. I still feel somewhat nervous because Davis
Well, how
Mills.
could you not? Because Davis Mills, exactly.
But I am looking at Dalton Schultz as a tournament play this week at $3,600 on DraftKings, $5,100 on FanDuel. I should just also say, like, he is a tournament consideration because I don't know why I decided not to pick AJ Barner for this portion of the show, or I don't think I had the salary at this point where I was like, oh yeah, I can fit Trey McBride. Like, those guys are also tournament considerations, but Dalton Schultz is an interesting one for me playing for Houston this week at $3,600. It's really just like he has been getting really solid volume over the past several weeks, and the matchup is as good as it can be. The Jacksonville Jaguars have averaged nearly 30 points allowed to the tight end position. Now, keep in mind that since week 6, by the way.
So it's just a wild number.
It is a wild number, but keep in mind that that was the team that Brock Bowers put up the 46th spot on last week. So that is skewing the numbers, but clearly they don't know how to defend tight ends. And it's also like an interesting, I think, game environment for Houston. I mean, it's a low total, so it's like not going to be, I don't expect a lot of touchdowns to be scored in this game, but it's a close spread. It's 1.5. So there's enough back and forth potential that I think there will be enough volume that Schultz can get there from a PPR perspective.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, and it's not worth a lot, but for what it's worth, Schultz is a guy who was on this team when Davis Mills was leading them the first time around. So it's someone who there's a familiarity and a comfortability with. So maybe there's something to that as he takes back over the starting job. As I mentioned, I am going to stack Jared Goff. I'm going to go the Sam Laporta route in GPP, 4,400 on DraftKings, 6,400 on FanDuel. Washington, everything we just said, guess what? They struggle against tight ends as well. And over the last 3 games, 2 tight ends have hit 20 points on them. It's not Brock Bowers numbers, but I'm hoping I can get a 20-point week out of my tight end on any given week. 46 points is just the icing on the cake. So I like Sam Laporta. I was a little shocked. I was updating my rest of season projections this week. I did not. Laporta's having a decent season. Like, nobody's really setting the world on fire. Brock Bowers may be the spark lately, but nobody's really set the world on fire at tight end. Laporta's like the tight end 6 or something doing his job. He just hasn't been fantastic, but nobody has.
Yeah, no, that's really true. He's been very consistent, and we haven't seen like one of those really solid games, and this could easily be one of them.
Yeah. Austin, we can't finish these lineups without our defenses, and is this the same team you mentioned up top?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I was like, I for some reason I thought it wasn't, but it is. So.
Yeah, I'm going with the Jacksonville Jaguars because I truly can't decide where else I'm more interested this weekend. Yeah. They're cheap enough. Like I feel like it's a challenging slate for defense. Now the good thing is defense usually doesn't matter, but I can make a case for most defenses failing this week. Except for Jacksonville. I feel like Jacksonville has the safest floor this week, and they have the ceiling going up against Davis Mills. Now, because of that, like I'm still going to play the defense that fits with whatever lineup I'm building. I'm not going to limit my lineup because I have to play a certain defense. So I'll get exposure elsewhere, but I think Jacksonville is just going to be so solid. It's easy to fit them into any lineup.
Yep. Austin, I'm with you. It's something, honestly, over the course of this season, you have turned me on. I am playing the cheapest defense I trust. You and I both happened to land on the Atlanta Falcons last week. They weren't great, but they weren't bad. Even though in the show, we both announced Houston, who I think scored 3 more points than Atlanta. So neither here nor there. But I did it again this week. So, but it ended up being 2 different defenses, and so I'm announcing them both. On DraftKings, it's the Cleveland Browns, and it's just not close to me. They're my stream of the week defense. The fact that they are as cheap as they are on DraftKings is beyond ridiculous. I feel like they're a free square, plain and simple. I feel like everyone's going to be playing them. They're playing the Jets, who have Justin Fields and not much else, and they have Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett, the last time he was on the field, sacked Drake May 5 times. I don't know how many times he's going to sack Justin Fields, but it feels like a lot. And then Austin, I'd almost convinced myself I was never going to do this. But when I look at the price and I look at the matchup and I look at how well the Carolina Panthers have been playing on defense against Tyler Shug and the Saints coming to Carolina, I like this matchup, and they're not like dirt cheap on FanDuel, but 3,600 puts them 1,400 behind the most expensive defense. And Austin, they're getting after the quarterback. They're forcing turnovers. They're not great, but I think they're great enough to beat up on a rookie quarterback who is in his second game and no longer has Rashid Shaheed to throw to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with that, except for the piece of analysis in there that has anything to do with it being in Carolina, because I'm here to tell you
there's no home field advantage.
That is the sleepiest stadium I have ever been in my life.
Okay. Well, perfect. At least they didn't have to travel. We'll just put it in that. So.
There you go. No, I like it though for all the other reasons you say that. It's a good matchup, rookie quarterback with limited pass catchers.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I'm sure they're going to let me down. It's the first time I've said them. I've joked with folks on some of our other shows. I'll never call them my stream of the week because I will not put that on my name. But for DFS Austin, the price is right. There's another aspect, and that's pricing. The price is right. I'm willing to give it a try. So that wraps up the show. But before we get out of here, we do what we call the valedictorian shootout. And Austin, boy, oh boy, do we have some things to talk about this week, because this has never happened before. The final score, Austin and I announced lineups just for me and him, just so you guys can get an idea of how we would build a lineup on a Thursday night. The final score was 142.3 to 141.7. Austin wins the Thursday night show. Well, Thursday night show, I don't want to say that. Our contest by 0.6, not even a full point, bringing you to 4-5, Austin. You're almost back to 500. We both smashed at QB, tight end, and defense. I want to bring the lineup up real quick because tight end was the most hilarious one because we had the number 1 and number 2 tight end. I just don't remember. We had Colston Loveland and Brock Bowers as our tight ends last week between the two of us. So we smashed there. We smashed at quarterback. We smashed at defense. Well, we did okay at defense because we had the same defense. I did okay at running back and wide receiver. You did terrible at running back, but you smashed at wide receiver. So it was a roller coaster battle as I was putting these scores together. Congratulations, Austin. That was a fun one. 4-5. As always, I will announce my lineup first. I believe we've talked about every one of these games. We just haven't talked about a few of my players. I'm going Jared Goff, Quinshon Judkins. I'm going Travis Etienne for a lot of the reasons Austin likes the Jacksonville defense. Surprise, surprise. I like the Jacksonville running back. And then Austin, I couldn't decide how I wanted to go here. I ended up going with the 3 running back build. I'm going Woody Marks on the other side of that matchup because I feel like Davis Mills is going to be a dump-off king, and Woody Marks seems to be the pass-catching back there. I'm going to go Amon-Ra St. Brown and Mika Ibuka, and then I'm going Khalil Shakir. Austin, you very briefly touched. That Buffalo-Miami game should be a decent game environment. Khalil Shakir feels safe for the type of matchup you and I run here. As I mentioned, I'm treating me and you like a cash matchup, so I'm going Amon-Ra St. Brown as my stack, which means I'm going somewhere else at tight end. Mark Andrews caught 2 balls last week. They both were for touchdowns. Minnesota struggles against the tight end. They allow touchdowns. I think Mark Andrews could score again this week. And then, of course, because this is DraftKings scoring, I am going with the dirt cheap Cleveland defense.
I love it. Well, and this was a really nice surprise because I'm going to be honest. When I was making the show sheet, I was like looking at my lineup from last week and I saw Kamani Vidal, Tyrone Tracy on my end.
So I literally score it. I score it position by position, and when your 2 running backs are in, I promise you, I was like, well, I want another one.
I was like, oh yeah, and then I saw Brock Bowers, and I was like, well, I'm not paying attention. So literally, when you told me just now, it was the first time that I realized I won last week because I had just given up all.
Well, yeah, you kept up with Brock Bowers with Colston Loveland, and then, like I said, your wide receivers was just infinitely better than mine. So.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get to do that again this week with the receivers.
That was a blast.
Because I am going with a lineup that will not surprise you based on who I mentioned in the cash show. First off, at quarterback, going with Jacoby Brissett at $4,600. And this is the reason why. Because first off, I get Devon Achane into my lineup at $7,400. I'm also saving a little bit with Ramondre Stevenson. I will accept the goose egg if I have to take it.
Yeah.
Because I am
Yeah,
able to
I
also
just saw
fit.
your next two players.
I am also able to fit Amon-Ra St. Brown in my lineup, but I also get Jackson Smith and Jigba, who just has been getting those 10 plus target games week after week. So excited about that. And then Parker Washington and Darius Slayton are also able to fit really good high volume guys. I've got Mason Taylor then at tight end, and wrapping it up with the Jacksonville Jaguars defense.
Yeah. Like you said, you covered every one of those guys. You got the 2 stud wide receivers, and that was enough to do it for you last week. However, neither Austin nor I took down the DraftKings or FanDuel's contest. Join the class, folks. You can jump into $2 contests with us on DraftKings and FanDuel. Links in the description of this video. Last week on DraftKings, P for Shizzle, a name you've heard on this show before, 185.9. Really good contest there. 10th win all time for P for Shizzle. On FanDuel, and this is what I was talking about, Austin, I had one of my worst weeks on FanDuel. Math is Golden, a name we've seen quite a bit on this show as well. 182.7 on FanDuel's half point PR scoring. That's a monster score on FanDuel. That is Math is Golden's second win of the season. If you would like to hear your name announced on the show, jump into those contests and win them. And we'll be more than happy to give you all the praise that you deserve. Austin, what a show. It always is. Let everybody know what you're putting out DFS-wise here at Club Fantasy.
Yeah, you can catch me here every Friday talking the DFS main slate with Ryan for DFS Academy. You can also catch me and Josh Hudson breaking down the Thursday night showdown slate every week on Thursdays. And most importantly, come join the Discord. The link to that is in the show description. We'll talk about DFS anytime that you want, help you set your lineups for Sunday, and then celebrate our wins together Monday morning.
Most of Club Fantasy's DFS content is here on YouTube with Austin. I put out a matchup report that is viable for DFS. I'm trying to remember to turn this show sheet into an article. I tend to forget. I'm going to try to do better about it. It's just Fridays have gotten away from me many, many times, so they never go out. But we do put out a lot of content at clubfantasyffl.com. Make sure you guys check it out. Make sure you follow Club Fantasy on all the socials at Club Fantasy FFL. You can follow Austin at Austin_FFL, me at the Fantasy 5. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good luck building lineups this week. Hope it's a great one unless you're in my contest. We'll see you next week.